Radar contact appeared at 6:14 a.m. Not one contact, not three. 47 discrete signals scattered across a 12 nautical mile arc, all holding position northwest of Mischief Reef. The Combat Information Center watch officer stared at the display for 3 full seconds, then reached for the internal line to the bridge. The South China Sea in early morning carries a specific quality of light, not the dramatic gold of sunrise, but a flat, diffuse gray that makes everything look slightly unreal. The water at this latitude runs a deep jade green, almost opaque. Visibility stretched 4 miles before humidity absorbed the horizon into white haze. The wind was negligible. Sea state 1. The kind of morning that should have been peaceful. It was not peaceful. The destroyer had been conducting a routine freedom of navigation transit through the Spratly Islands for 11 hours, documented, lawful, entirely within international waters under UNCLOS. The nearest claimed Chinese feature, Mischief Reef, with its 7-story complex and reinforced runway, built on what had been 18 years earlier a submerged shoal, lay 14 nautical miles to the northeast. Chinese sovereignty claims over these waters had no basis in international law. The International Court of Arbitration had ruled accordingly in 2016. Beijing had rejected that ruling the same afternoon. The captain reached the bridge at 6:17 a.m. He studied the radar display for 20 seconds without speaking. The 47 contacts were not random. They were arranged in a loose but identifiable formation. A wide arc curving from northwest to northeast, concave toward the destroyer's current course. At its center point, the arc was approximately 9 nautical miles away, closing, slowly but unmistakably closing, behind the fishing vessels, because that is what their AIS transponders identified them as, fishing vessels, every single one. The tactical officer had flagged 3 larger contacts, China Coast Guard cutters. He had calculated their displacement from radar cross-sections. 2 in the 4,000-ton range, 1 significantly larger. The largest was almost certainly a Type 818, a 12,000-ton vessel that dwarfed the destroyer by 3,000 tons of steel, and 14 nautical miles beyond the Coast Guard formation, barely at the edge of the radar's reliable detection range. A 4th contact, large, military profile, a Type 054, a frigate, planned. It was not closing. It was observing. He had seen this before. Every senior surface warfare officer in the Pacific Fleet had seen some version of this before. The Chinese called it layered presence operations. Analysts in Washington called it the cabbage strategy, wrapping a target in concentric rings of vessels until the geometry of maneuvering became impossible without confrontation. Start with fishing boats, add Coast Guard, back it with Navy. Each layer provided deniability for the one behind it. The order went to the helm without drama. Speed reduced, course held. The destroyer settled at 12 knots and waited for the picture to develop. What made it effective was not force, it was patience and numbers. The destroyer held course at 12 knots. At 6:31 a.m., the tactical picture updated. The arc of fishing vessels had tightened. 47 contacts had become 51. 4 additional vessels had emerged from behind Mischief Reef and joined the formation's eastern flank. The arc was no longer 9 miles away. It was 6.8 nautical miles, and the geometry of its curvature was now unambiguous. It was not just an arc. It was the beginning of a circle. Below 2,000 yards, international maritime law defined the situation as requiring action from one vessel or the other. Below 1,000, it was a provocation. Below 500, it was a prelude to collision in any body of water on Earth. The CPA calculation came back from the tactical officer without prompting. The lead fishing vessel was at 1,400 yards and closing. 22 minutes at current rate before that number became a problem that couldn't be ignored. Channel 16 was silent. The Coast Guard cutters had not transmitted. The fishing fleet had not transmitted. No bridge-to-bridge call, no warning, no demand. The South China Sea at 6:33 a.m. sounded on the radio like open ocean with no ships within 50 miles. The silence was not absence. It was message. In the gray zone, silence is its own vocabulary. The officer of the deck glanced at the captain. Nothing in his expression asked a question out loud, but the question was there. The captain's eyes were fixed on the primary radar display. He had not spoken in 4 minutes. $2.4 billion of American naval engineering was holding a course through international waters that China had decided unilaterally belonged to it. The freedom of navigation transit was not a provocation. It was a statement, the same statement the U.S. Navy had been making in these waters for decades. International law exists. The ocean is not Chinese territory. The passage is lawful. The passage will continue. The fishing fleet was about to make that statement, very expensive to maintain. At 6:41 a.m., the AIS transponder on the lead fishing vessel went dark. In the CIC, the watch officer noted the timestamp. One vessel dropping AIS could be a technical issue. When a second vessel went dark 11 seconds later, and a third 40 seconds after that, it was not technical. It was coordinated. By 6:44 a.m., 31 of the 51 fishing contacts had switched off their AIS transponders. They remained visible on radar. You cannot hide a 200-ton steel hull from a military-grade radar suite. But their identity, their flag, their registered owner, their nominal purpose, gone. They were now anonymous steel on the water, and they were still closing. CPA to the nearest contact, 1,100 yards. The captain keyed the internal circuit and requested a classification count on the fishing contacts. Confidence levels, behavioral patterns, electromagnetic profile. The response came in 40 seconds. Of the 51 vessels, the electronic intelligence suite had high confidence classification on 19, consistent electromagnetic emissions, hull profiles, and behavioral patterns matching known maritime militia assets from the Spratly Island operating zone. Not fishermen. Military reservists operating fishing registered vessels under coordination from shore. The remaining 32 could not be classified with certainty, but their coordinated AIS shutdown at an identical moment made their nature statistically unambiguous. This was not a fishing fleet. This was an operation. At 6:49 a.m., the 3 Coast Guard cutters began their approach. They had been holding at approximately 6 nautical miles while the fishing layer did its work. Now they moved. The 2 4,000-ton cutters separated, one accelerating toward the destroyer's port quarter, one toward the starboard bow. Classic flanking geometry. The 12,000-ton Type 818 moved directly ahead, positioning itself between the destroyer and open water to the southwest. CPA to the nearest CCG cutter, 1,800 yards and dropping. CPA to the lead fishing contacts, 900 yards. The numbers were converging. The box was taking shape. The captain walked to the port bridge wing. The air was warm and thick with Gulf humidity, carrying the faint smell of diesel exhaust from the fishing fleet. Outboard engines, dozens of them. Audible now as a low mechanical drone drifting across the flat water. Through binoculars, he could see the nearest fishing vessels clearly. Steel hulls, commercial white paint, wheelhouses. He could see crew members standing on their decks, watching the destroyer. Several had cameras. That was significant. Not the cameras themselves. Chinese maritime militia routinely documented encounters for propaganda purposes, but their positioning. The crew members with cameras were not watching the water or managing their vessel. They were watching the destroyer specifically. They were waiting for something to happen. They wanted footage of an American warship altering course. The captain came back through the bridge door and gave a single instruction to the officer of the deck. Course 210, speed 12. Hold it. The MH-60R Seahawk was already on deck, rotors turning, crew aboard. The captain had ordered it to ready 5:40 minutes earlier, before the formation had fully developed. He had been doing this long enough to recognize the opening moves. At 7:02 a.m., the bridge-to-bridge radio activated for the first time. China Coast Guard vessel 5204 broadcast on bridge-to-bridge in calm, accented English, identifying itself, claiming the destroyer was operating in waters adjacent to Chinese sovereign territory and demanding an immediate course change. The message repeated twice, then went silent. The captain did not respond. In the gray zone, responding to a false legal claim validates it. Silence is not agreement. It is refusal. Every maritime lawyer in the 5th and 7th Fleet legal offices would say the same thing. Do not respond to a sovereignty claim you do not recognize in waters where no sovereignty claim is legally valid. The response would go into the diplomatic record. The diplomatic record would be used. The radio cycled again at 7:06 a.m. Same message, same voice. Third time at 7:10 a.m. The destroyer's course remained 210. CPA to CCG, vessel 5204. The 4,000-ton cutter, now positioned off the port quarter, had dropped to 1,300 yards. The vessel was matching the destroyer's speed and gradually edging inward on a parallel course. In standard maritime terms, this was shouldering the most basic form of physical intimidation available to a surface vessel without weapons release. You simply position your hull next to another hull and reduce the distance until the other ship either turns or accepts an increasingly dangerous proximity. The helmsman had been on watch since 5:30 a.m. He was 23 years old. He had adjusted the destroyer's course 41 times in the previous 40 minutes. Small corrections. A half degree here, 2 degrees there, keeping the track true against the gentle current. His hands on the wheel were steady. The course was 210. Every time the targeting system updated the geometry and the numbers got smaller, his hands stayed where they were. 210, 210, 210. The CCG cutter was at 1,100 yards on the port side. CCG 5204's radio broadcasts had stopped. It had asked 3 times. The American ship had not responded. Now, both ships understood where this was going. At 7:14 a.m., the Seahawk launched. It climbed to 400 feet and positioned itself between the destroyer and CCG vessel 5204. Not over the CCG vessel, not threatening, but visible, present. It established a hover pattern that made its purpose unambiguous. This is our ship, and we have an eye on you specifically. The Type 818, the 12,000-ton behemoth ahead, had continued its slow deceleration. It was now at 2,100 yards ahead, matching the destroyer's course, but reducing speed by half a knot every 4 minutes. A patient compression. Reduce speed, let the destroyer close the gap ahead, then reduce speed again. Force a choice. Slow down, and let the flanking cutters tighten their grip or hold speed and close the distance forward until the geometry became critical. At 12 knots, the destroyer would close 2,100 yards to the Type 818 in approximately 3 minutes, 20 seconds. The captain made his decision. The destroyer accelerated, not dramatically, from 12 to 18 knots, a controlled, purposeful increase. The course change of 25 degrees to the right was not a retreat from the transit lane. It was a geometry solution. By angling away from the Type 818 ahead while increasing speed, the destroyer would pass the 12,000-ton vessel's bow at a controlled distance, too fast for the Type 818 to match without exceeding safe maneuvering speed in the cluttered formation, and emerge southwest of the box before it fully closed. It was the same maneuver that had broken the Taiwan Strait squeeze geometry 3 months earlier. The CCG cutter on the port quarter could not match the acceleration. At 4,000 tons to the destroyer's 9,200 tons, the mathematics of the hull-speed ratio worked differently. The cutter's top speed was 21 knots. The destroyer's was 31. More importantly, the destroyer had reached 18 knots faster. CPA to CCG, Vessel 5204, 900 yards, stabilizing. CPA to the Type 818, 1,600 yards and opening. But the starboard bow cutter, CCG Vessel 3901, had anticipated the right turn. It had been holding position 2,800 yards off the starboard bow, and as the destroyer came right, it accelerated into an intercept. New CPA to CCG 3901, 1,400 yards and dropping. The fishing fleet on the eastern flank was still there, still closing, still silent. At 7:23 a.m., a new friction event. The CIC reported it to the bridge in clipped professional language. CCG 3901 had activated fire control radar. X-band, consistent with a Type 347G targeting system. Active tracking mode. Fire control radar illumination was not a weapons release. It was a step on the escalation ladder, a deliberate hostile signal. It said, "We have you in our targeting solution. We are one command away." In the context of international maritime law, it was deeply problematic. In the context of the gray zone, it was a chess move designed to force a response that could be filmed and presented as provocation. The captain's response was immediate. His own fire control radar activated within seconds, locking the AN/SPG-62 targeting system onto CCG 3901. Passive CIWS tracking swung to cover the Type 818. The Seahawk repositioned to CCG 3901's bridge aspect with laser marker on standby. The destroyer's SPY-1D radar had been in air search mode throughout the encounter. Now the fire control channel activated, the targeting illumination painting CCG 3901 with the full capability of the AN/SPG-62 fire control system. In the CIC, the weapons officer confirmed lock. On CCG 3901's bridge, their electronic warfare suite would now be screaming at him. They were being tracked by a weapons system that could engage at ranges they could not respond to. The CIWS mount rotated on its pedestal above the bridge, its barrel traversing to point at the Type 818. It did not fire. It did not need to fire. The barrel moving was the message. CPA to CCG 3901, 1,100 yards. At 7:26 a.m., the Seahawk descended to 200 feet and positioned itself 300 yards ahead of CCG 3901, hovering directly in the cutter's path. The laser marker activated. An invisible to the naked eye beam of focused, coherent light that painted a precise point on CCG 3901's bridge windows. On the cutter's bridge, every optical instrument, binoculars, camera, rangefinder, would now be receiving a blinding pulse of light. The message in that beam was simple and universal. We see you, specifically, individually. We know exactly where your bridge is. At 7:28 a.m., the CIC updated. CCG 3901 fire control radar had dropped to standby. The captain noted the time, 14 seconds. CCG 3901 had held active fire control lock for 14 seconds after the destroyer lit them up in return. 14 seconds was not a test of resolve. 14 seconds was a test of nerve. And when the destroyer had matched and exceeded, the cutter's captain had decided the exchange rate was unfavorable. Small victory. The geometry was still dangerous. CPA to CCG 3901, 850 yards. CPA to lead fishing contacts on the eastern flank, 700 yards. The fishing vessels were the most complex problem. There were 51 of them. The destroyer's radar painted all 51, and the Seahawk had eyes on the nearest cluster, but 51 vessels, even if none of them were individually threatening, created a wall of steel that was simply too dense to sail through at speed without catastrophic risk of collision. Not from hostile intent. From the chaotic, unpredictable behavior of small vessel operators who might panic, might have equipment failures, might make sudden course changes that a 9,200-ton warship at 18 knots could not avoid. The fishing fleet was the real weapon, not the Coast Guard cutters, not the planned frigate watching from 14 miles away. The fishing boats, civilian registered, internationally ambiguous, numerous, unpredictable, were the cage. At 7:31 a.m., the long-range acoustic device activated. The LRAD was not a weapon in the kinetic sense. It was a directed sound system projecting an intensely uncomfortable acoustic signal over a focused arc. At 500 yards, it was disorienting. At 200 yards, incapacitating. The destroyer directed it at the densest cluster of fishing vessels on the eastern flank. 23 vessels packed into a half-mile arc, and broadcast a tone, followed by a voice warning in Mandarin, directing all vessels in the operating area to alter course immediately and clear the zone. The legal validity of that instruction in international waters was arguable. The acoustic effect on small boat operators maneuvering at close range to a warship was not. 11 of the 23 vessels began turning away within 90 seconds. CPA to lead fishing contacts, 650 yards, rate of closure decreasing. At 7:34 a.m., the radio opened again. A different voice, higher register, faster cadence, broadcast a protest in English accusing the U.S. warship of conducting hostile operations against Chinese fishing vessels and demanding an immediate course change. The tone was sharp. The legal basis was non-existent. The captain did not respond. The helmsman had been holding course 235 for 22 minutes. His relief was scheduled at 8 a.m. He had 26 minutes left on his watch. He had not eaten since 4 a.m. The coffee mug clipped to the helm console had been cold for an hour. None of this mattered. His hands were on the wheel. The course was 235. The nearest steel object, not crewed by his shipmates, was 650 yards away, and the number was still dropping, and his hands were on the wheel, and the course was 235. That was his entire universe. At 7:37 a.m., something changed. The trailing CCG cutter, the 4,000-ton vessel that had been holding position off the port quarter, had been a passive element in the geometry for the past 20 minutes, following the destroyer's course at 900 yards. Consistent, predictable. Now its speed dropped by 1.5 knots. Not much. 1.5 knots on a 4,000-ton vessel in open water meant almost nothing tactically. The captain noticed. He did not say anything. He stood at the center bridge window and watched the radar display update in 3-second sweeps. The cutter's track was now slightly divergent, not turning away, not accelerating, just slowing. A half step back from the geometry. In 26 years of surface warfare, he had learned to read the moment before the moment. A poker player called it a tell. The micro signal that preceded the decision by 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. The trailing cutter's captain had made a calculation. He had reduced speed because the arithmetic of the engagement had changed in a direction he did not like. The destroyer was faster. The fire control radar had been matched. The LRAD had disrupted the fishing formation. The Seahawk had neutralized CCG 3901's close approach. The box was not closing the way it was supposed to close. The trailing cutter was hedging. The captain still said nothing. He let the silence hold. At 7:41 a.m. CCG 3901, the starboard bull cutter that had been the most aggressive element of the formation made a course adjustment, 3 degrees to starboard, 3 degrees, in the middle of the South China Sea, with no land within 14 nautical miles. A course adjustment of 3 degrees was essentially invisible. The Seahawk crew overhead might not have noticed it without the targeting data. The bridge crew, watching with binoculars, would have seen nothing. But on the CIC tactical display, the destroyer's tactical officer recalculated CPA in real time. CCG 3901, CPA 900 yards. Previously 850, dropping. Now 900, stabilizing. 3 degrees. That was it. That was the tell. The captain's expression did not change. He stood at the window for another 45 seconds, watching the contact tracks, waiting for the data to confirm what he already knew. The fishing fleet on the eastern flank was dispersing, slowly, without drama. Individual vessels finding reasons to head back toward the reef. The LRAD had given them an excuse. The Type 818 ahead had stopped decelerating and was now holding a constant course and speed that would carry it across the destroyer's bow at a safe 2,400 yards. The geometry of the box was dissolving, not because of a dramatic moment, not because of a confrontation at 200 yards with sailors shouting across the gap, because of a 3-degree course correction, a speed reduction of 1.5 knots, and the accumulated weight of 27 minutes of American resolve. At 7:44 a.m., CCG vessel 5204, the port quarter cutter that had been the closest follower, made its move, not toward the destroyer, away, a clean course change to the northwest, increasing speed to 18 knots, breaking off. It did not broadcast anything, no formal withdrawal, no acknowledgement. It simply turned and went northwest. At 7:46 a.m., the Type 818, the 12,000-ton vessel that had anchored the entire formation's forward geometry, increased speed from 8 knots to 16 and altered course to the northeast, toward Mischief Reef. It had somewhere else to be. In the CIC, the tactical officer updated the display. The contacts were separating. The arc that had been tightening for 90 minutes was now loosening. Individual vessels peeling away from the formation like a knot coming undone, one thread at a time. CPA to nearest remaining contact, 1,300 yards, and opening. On the bridge, no one said anything for a long moment. The boatswain's mate of the watch realized his shoulders had been up around his ears for the past 40 minutes. He let them drop. The sound that came out of him was not quite a sigh, just a controlled exhalation, the specific noise of a human body releasing tension it had been storing. The officer of the deck straightened his collar, unnecessarily. Force of habit when something ends. The helmsman continued to hold course 235. His relief would arrive in 12 minutes. He would brief the incoming helmsman, transfer the wheel, and go below. He would not sleep well for several nights, but he would remember, specifically and physically, the sensation of a ship's wheel under his hands while 51 vessels tried to make him turn. He had not turned. The course had been 235. The course had stayed 235. The captain stood at the window for another 4 minutes after the last Coast Guard cutter broke contact. Then he turned and gave the order to resume normal transit speed and restore standard watch rotations. That was all. The Seahawk recovered aboard at 7:52 a.m. Fire control radar returned to search mode. CIWS returned to standby. The LRAD powered down. The destroyer continued southwest at 15 knots under flat gray morning sky. The planned frigate held its position for another 20 minutes, then turned northeast and faded from the display. Behind the ship, Mischief Reef's 7-story complex shrank in the wake. The transit was not over. There were still 14 nautical miles ahead, but this formation had blinked. At 9:41 a.m., the destroyer completed its transit and entered the Philippine Sea. The watch log would note, freedom of navigation transit completed without incident. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 0, underscore, underscore, meant no weapons released, no physical contact, no formal protest. In the legal sense, nothing had happened. In every other sense, something significant had. A $2.4 billion warship had transited waters a major power claimed as its own. 51 vessels had tried to stop it through geometry. They had failed through geometry. The South China Sea remained what it had always been, open water. 51 vessels, 3 Coast Guard cutters, 1 planned frigate observing, 97 minutes of pressure, CPA minimum, 650 yards, inches yielded, 0. The ship's log says what the heading indicator said for 97 minutes straight. Course held, transit completed. In the South China Sea, that is the